podcast. Really excited as you're joining today with David Greer. Now, David, we got connected through the beautiful internet land, and he has an amazing story. As a facilitator in business, his whole thing is how do we generate actions that actually generate success and progress, whether that's in business and in life. The idea of bringing high growth on a strategic basis for businesses. This is how David can help entrepreneurs get unstuck and move past what may be blocking them, ideally in the next 90 days. So if you're listening to this, make sure that you're taking down some notes. You're going to be walking away with some action steps for you to take for your life and your business. And another added layer of curiosity to what David does is his background in addiction is very related with how business owners sometimes get stuck in this addiction phase. So really glad that we're having this conversation, David. In the world of today, I know a lot of people get caught up in action, 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 and this can lead to maybe a deficiency in relationships, maybe their health. So I want to make sure that we're really touching our holistic approach to our conversation. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. And yes, I think we can touch on all of those things. And I have several thoughts around the entrepreneurial journey and how we look after our business sometimes better than we look after ourselves.
So let's begin with specifically around running a business. We know that there's a lot of different layers to it. There's a lot of different talents to get invested. From what you've been working through in your career, helping other entrepreneurs, and again, with your background in addiction, how do you see business easily become almost like a way for people to tune into an addictive pattern and use that as almost a way to tune everything else out?
Well, let me phrase it this way. What I see with a lot of entrepreneurs is they work in the business.
Mm-hmm. Not on
and
the
I try and
business.
encourage them to work on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And when the next email's coming, when the next client request, when the next thing, like that's really hard. So I want to be clear, like that is really hard. But that's I think where we get down a rabbit hole that can lead to a lot of bad things.
Yeah, so let's explore that because I think a really
Right?
key thing in business is people don't understand the difference between being an operator and being an owner. And to
Yeah,
your
right.
point, working in and on is a very different context. You're operating at
So
very different levels.
so to me, working on the business means taking a step back, taking one giant step back from the operations of the business and thinking about the business in a bigger context, like your strategy and where you're going and how you could improve the business, whether that's how you show up, whether it's your employees. So again, you're taking this separate view that's not just the next fire, the next issue, the next thing. And I mean that the framework, a really eye-opening experience for me was when I attended a workshop several years ago. A guy, Vern Harnish, he's got a framework, one-page strategic plan. That's what I use to facilitate strategic planning. And in Vern's world, you start 3 to 5 years out. So I liken it like this. Most of us, when we end up operating our business, like we're looking down at our toes and we're kind of seeing if there's a stone we're going to step on in our next step. But we forget to look up and remind ourselves, like, where are we going? Like, are we on a path that's taking us someplace that we actually want to go? And so again, this starting like, where do you want to be in 3 years? And there's no right or wrong answer. Like, you want to be smaller, you want to be the same, you want to be bigger, you want to be in more markets, you want to be in less. Like, again, you can make conscious choice about those things. And I think as business owners and entrepreneurs, we forget that we can actually step back and make a plan to say where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. And, I started with a young software startup when I was 22 and I was still going to university, and I stayed 20 years and built it into a global powerhouse. And we were massively successful. And we did kind of a traditional entrepreneurial approach, which is take what we did last year and do incrementally better this year, and it worked pretty well. And I think we could have done even more things, and especially towards the end when the market was really shifting, if we had better spent more time thinking about where we wanted the business to be in 3 or 5 years, maybe my former partner and I wouldn't have ended up like in divorce, which is how we finally ended things. I mean, that divorce ended up creating massive opportunities for me, but especially on the personal side. But again, I just wonder, I try not to second guess the past. The past is the past. But there are some things I wish I knew
Sure.
earlier in my life. So again, it's this idea of, rather than focusing on like the next rock that's going to be underneath your foot and the next step on the path, it's like looking up and having, like, literally looking up what's on the horizon. Are you on a path that's going to lead you where you actually want to be? Right?
Yeah, which for most people, they don't take the time to take a step back.
They don't take the time to do that. And, you know, my recommendation is that you really do that at least once a year. And then, you know, I really believe in quarterly planning. And the reason I believe in quarterly planning is a quarter is 13 weeks. In 13 weeks, you can get a lot of shit done. And if you're on the wrong path or going in the wrong direction, if you keep reevaluating at the end of every quarter, like, you'll know. And it won't be catastrophic or a total failure to the business, because it's like you've done enough serious stuff to know whether you're moving in the right direction. And then, like, stop, think about it, look where you went in the last quarter versus what you set yourself to do, and adjust with a set of, like, so it's plan 3 to 5 years where you want to be, have a set of goals for the year, and every quarter, like, come up with 4 or 5 goals to what you want to achieve. The thing I see, like, most of us entrepreneurs suffer from shiny red ball syndrome. Oh, look, there's an opportunity over there. That looks cool. Oh, I heard my friend, he's doing this thing over here. I should go look at that. And it actually takes real discipline to, like, come up with the plan and then stick with it.
For sure.
And I find a friend of mine, former person I worked with, used to say, you know, if an entrepreneur tells me once, I don't pay a lot of attention. If they tell me twice, I start paying a little more attention. And if they tell me 3 times, then I think they're serious. And I think there's, like, a lot of truth to that. The other thing I see is that we grossly estimate what we can do, like, in a year. Or we grossly overestimate what we can do in a day and a week, and underestimate what we can do in a year with sustained focus going in the same direction.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, you know, so I see the two kind of extremes: entrepreneurs who don't set any goals, and so their employees, the people who work for them, don't really know, you know, it's just kind of, well, I'll just keep doing my job because I don't know where we're going. Or they said, like, 12. You know, my experience, no organization can achieve more than 4 or 5 goals in a quarter.
And some OKR, some objective key results.
4 or 5 in a year. Limiting it, and that can get very hard. Like, a lot of my work as a facilitator is just getting all the ideas down and then, like, prioritizing and picking the top 4 or 5.
So real quick, let's explore it, because you've obviously been in business for some time. You built a company up, you exited that, and now you're doing for yourself what you're doing. What are some things, if you were to take 3 lessons that you've gotten for yourself in your journey of entrepreneurship up until today, what are 3 things that you tell yourself from the past or in the past?
So the first one is that one about stepping back from the business.
Got it.
Having a vision for where to go, and you know, a pulse, a rhythm to planning.
So
that's one.
Let's go deeper into that really quick. Let's go deeper into that. Because for a lot of business owners, the idea of having a vision is so daunting, because there's so many things I need to tend to, that it's like, okay, do I tend to this thing over here that's going to generate more revenue, take care of my clients, or do I take a step back and focus on the vision?
Okay, I have a simple question for you.
Sure.
Why'd you start your business?
Got it.
That's the question to ask yourself, because I think that's what gets lost in the busyness. And often, like, you grow a business and now, like, you got all these employees and yeah, you're making good coin and stuff, but, like, you've lost sight of, you know, you started a business because you had this vision, like, you saw this problem or this pain that people were in, and you came up with the pain pill solution that would solve their problem, and you started making it and selling it and putting people out of pain, and that can all get lost. And also, like, a lot of entrepreneurs have much more fun starting things than they do, like, operating them. So sometimes the best thing they can do is, like, hire a GM to run the operational part of the business, and they can get back to dreaming about, like, the next thing. or where they should, what markets, adjacent markets they should move into, or what new products to go invent, or new services. And let that creative piece come back out, because when we get snowed under in the operational piece, like that whole creative piece tends to get lost.
Totally. This is so
So
important for business owners to really start to understand who are they better at. So like, for example, there's this tool called predictive index. Have you ever heard of it?
no, I haven't.
The whole idea with predictive index is they help you as the operator, as the business owner, understand what your team operates as individually and then as a group. That's important because you can't have, for example, someone that's a captain that leads a ship do something that an analyst does, which is obviously look over data and ensure that the data can be optimized. What I've seen so far is that a lot of business owners, they think that they can do all the roles, and because they're thinking that they can do all the roles, they end up doing none of them. And then they're in this space of, how do I get this done because I need to do X, Y, and Z, instead of actually recognizing for themselves a level of self-awareness that lets them realize who they really are, what their actual strengths are, what they can do to optimize on their potential.
So let's take that. So I work a lot with owner founders who started like their own business. So the truth of the matter is, if you start your own business from scratch, you like have to do everything. And so you actually do know everything, like at some point, nascent point in the business. And then it grows, and that's no longer true. But that, as an entrepreneur, you don't think that, because you like literally figured it all out by the seat of your pants in order to grow the business. So yes, so then you need that self-awareness piece, which is, oh, I actually don't know as much about the business as I used to know all that, but I don't now. Right. And also the letting go piece. Like, the way to survive is to be in control of everything. Like, that's how you build a successful business.
Can you say it again? The way to survive is to let go of everything?
No, the way to survive is to actually control everything.
It's to control everything.
In the early stages. I'm talking about, right, founding a business, starting a business. Like, if you don't have strong control over everything, it'll probably fail. But as it grows, you need to let go. But, you know, most of us entrepreneurs are control freaks. So, I mean, we're also, you know, we do a lot of shit. So, so learning how to let go is hard. Like that's something that most entrepreneurs really struggle with.
That's a true measure of leadership right there, to be able to say, okay, can I delegate this task to you? And if I do delegate this to you, am I setting you up for success?
And can I let go and not jump in when I see you doing it wrong? Because you're not doing it the way that I did it.
Oh man, you bring up such a key point that I've seen so many times in businesses where owners or founders, they step in because they can do it correct. And yes, maybe the person was about to do it in a way that was going to cause a breakdown. But now, if you do that over time, what I've seen is that the person, the teammate, the coworker, the employee that was taking the initiative, if that is consistently done to them, they stop taking initiative.
Of course, and they should. They should, because, like, if you're always going to be overridden, like, why put yourself out there and like take the risk and get stomped on? Like, at some point, it, like, just as a human being, it makes no sense for you to continue taking initiative when it's like the rug always keeps getting swept out from under your feet. Also, you know, there are many ways to do a task or a thing, and your way may be a good way, and it may have worked really well in your business, but that doesn't mean that someone else can't do it better, quicker, faster, and different than you did it. So that letting go and delegating, it's not just the delegating piece, but it's actually trusting and building trust and not taking back the reins of control that you're so used to, right? And that's a lot of what engendered your success. It's why the business is still here. So this is like one of the entrepreneurs, I think, big struggles, especially for really successful businesses and businesses that keep growing. Also, it's hard for you know, if we look at something like Top Grading Brad Smart, you know, his thesis is, if A's hire B's and B's hire C's, then pretty soon all you got is Z's. And, you know, A's should hire double A's, double A's should hire triple A's. But that means, as an entrepreneur, like, you're hiring people that are smarter than you. And then it gets very hard. It's like, what's my role? Like, how will I keep up with them if they're smarter than me? But I remind entrepreneurs, like, you are still the person who has the most risk here. You own the shares. You started this all. If payroll's missed, you go to jail, not the employees, right? Maybe your CFO goes with you, but that's about it. Like, you have a lot of risk and responsibility. So, it's okay turning it over and like focusing on those strategic pieces and those risks. But you don't have to, it's fine to let go and hire people that are smarter than you. It's not going to make you redundant. Like, you are still going to be the business owner, and you're the one who's most likely best able to come up with the next vision and where the business should go and the direction, with help from the people that are around you. But that's, I think, what the entrepreneur's key role is that strategy piece, especially relative to your markets.
So let's go back really quick to, and that's also key, because I mean, we're talking about being able to be in a place of control, also releasing and letting go, bringing people on, but that are better than us. Because if we find ourselves being the smartest person at the table, we're at the wrong table.
Correct.
So to be able to bring better people into our team is going to require all of us to grow. And then for us to be able to say, okay, what do I need to do as the owner? I got these people around me that are that much better. What do I got to do to continue to evolve myself? Not in the fear of them taking over my business, but me as a leader to be able to continue to drive innovation and growth.
So I believe your growth as an entrepreneur in that scenario is that you have to grow to become super expert at making all the people that report to you successful, and to helping with their growth and how they grow into the next part of their role or the next phase of the business.
Gotcha.
And that's a very different role than the operational role that you started with, founding a business and getting it going and getting the first customers and all of that amazing stuff that entrepreneurs do.
Yeah, totally different.
And it's a big transition.
So let's go back to that dichotomy of a road where, as a startup, things are growing. You got to keep an eye on everything, because you got to make sure things are moving forward. Now you're looking to scale. Maybe you bring on someone that's overseas as a VA. You got a couple of other people that are now supporting you more in-house. But you come across this challenge where you need to control everything, but at the same time, let go. And this is where I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, they get caught up in the addictive cycle of, I need to do it. I'm going to help you, but I'm going to do it. You didn't do it right. I'm going to do it. What would you tell that business owner that's in that rut, that wants to have their team grow, but they need to do it themselves? How would you support them in taking a step back and letting the reins loose, per se?
I have no stock answer to that. As a coach, where I go in that scenario is trying to be curious and understand the belief system that is lying underneath that behavior.
Like, so what's a question you would ask the entrepreneur in that sense?
Why is it so important for you to retain control? What's in it for you for retaining that control? And then, depending on what the responses are, would then get me to ask more questions around that. And and we talk about in terms of addiction, as an entrepreneur, if you're not a workaholic, it's very easy to become a workaholic. So, if you're really caught up in that, I have this really powerful taskmaster spirit. It lets me get amazing amount of things done. I often do more in one day than just most human beings can do. But I've learned it doesn't serve me at all times. I now want to make conscious choice when it's operating at full speed, and often it's operating at full speed when and I don't even realize it. I'm being busy, I'm doing stuff, and I'm into action, and it's well, this is not what I wanted to do today. This is not where I wanted to be, and it's very subtle. And it shows up in tons of different guises. And so I've had to do a lot of personal work around what one of the things was naming it. When I finally got to name it, my taskmaster spirit, and I'm with the help of a therapist, I wanted to name it more negatively, but she pointed out that this is just you. So you don't want to, unless you want to think negative about yourself, Like it's just an aspect of you, and it served you very well. And like we had lots of examples, right? It's not always serving you well. So you just want to be neutral in naming it so that you can work with it.
So good. I love this because we're talking now. You say it's an aspect of you, and this is where I think a lot of people they get caught up in. They identify with the thing fully, and then they make themselves wrong because they find themselves in this maybe repeating loop or habit that doesn't necessarily support them. But what you're pointing to here is it's just an aspect of you. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make you wrong. It's just an aspect of you, and we can separate that, and even labeling it now gives it its own persona, which can give it its own identity. And at that point in time, it's not you as the individual tied into it. Now it's two different people, and it can give you a different perspective on it.
Again, it's that same idea of being able to take a step back,
Mm-hmm.
and there can be like my, adult brain, right, who can have a conversation with Taskmaster Spirit, which I actually do, and I actually have an internal visualization about a creature that it manifests as, which is an octopus for me. And you got 8 arms, you can do a lot of stuff. But I can be like I can actually have a conversation with it. And for anyone who hasn't done like deep therapy work and a lot of looking at your, where you come from and your family of origin, this can sound very woo-woo and like weird. I know it kind of did for me. I had a good therapist where I didn't let me judge it. And I just started getting into it and started doing it. And then it became very natural. And I mean, it's still been years of work. Like some of this stuff, I mean, this is stuff that is it was probably baked into me by the time I was 2.
I mean, and the personal development growth journey is never ending.
Correct.
This is, you're talking about active imagination, where the first time I heard about active imagination was from an archetypal standpoint. And the idea of, okay, have a conversation between the different archetypes. And I'm specifically referencing here the king, the magician, the warrior, and the lover from Jung's psychology.
Okay.
But to be able to do so, to be able to take a look at, okay, active imagination, now I can do it. And I practice this because when I find myself in a space where I'm in a doing mode, but then I take a step back and I say, okay, am I actually progressing on something? To relate it back to what you were saying, sometimes we get caught up in the confusion of activity being progress when all we're doing is we have the pedal to the metal, but we're in oil and the wheels are spinning and you got the fumes coming out, but you're stuck. You're not really going anywhere. Are we actually putting the time and effort into activity that is progressing us towards the goal?
Yes.
Or are we just now in this perpetual doing cycle, thinking we're going somewhere, not really going
But I
anywhere?
also go back to like my first assertion from the start of the conversation, which is you got to have a set of goals you're going for. Like if you don't have those to start with, then who knows whether you're making progress. The other thing, I coach teams around is it strategy, which is your plan, or is it execution? Like how well you actually make the plan happen. And it's a trick question because the answer is neither. It's about alignment. Like when you have an entrepreneur and a senior leadership team, you need to be aligned and moving in the same direction. And you all have to have agreement that you're going to move in that direction. Because if you don't, then I take the analogy that you were just talking about, which is because I'm a sailor and I like water and boats. It's like being in a rowboat and everyone is rowing, like just paddling like crazy. And there's water splashing everywhere. And, the boat's rocking from the waves it's creating from all of these oars, but you're just going in circles because you're not, first of all, you don't have a clear goal of where you're trying to row to, and you're not aligned, right? So it starts with alignment. I want to give listeners like some practical things on like, so the personal development and how to think about. So for 9 years, I worked with an
Really quick, and I'm sorry to stop you there. I think what you were pointing to is so big for us to maybe explore a little bit deeper, and maybe you can give the listeners a way in which they can bring that alignment. If you're working with a team and you see that there's no alignment in place, how would you support them in generating that sense of alignment so that they can work towards a similar purpose and goal?
You got to meet off site and bang heads, and it's not that you're not in disagreement, but you need to spend a half a day or a day, and you need to hammer out a plan, and everybody has to agree when you leave the room that this is the plan for now. One of the advantages of quarterly planning is that everybody can get back together and re-argue. Well, and they should have new data. Like it's like you have 13 weeks of data of like the current plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that should inform you like whether you're on track or not on track. And, you know, because if you get these regular pulse points, then everyone gets a chance to come in and have their say again.
Got it.
And again, to debate it, like I encourage vigorous debate in my planning sessions. No personal, but no personal. Like it can be a bad idea. You're not a bad person because I think it's a bad idea. Those are two very different things, right? So I shut people down if they like personally have, you know, any personal. It's not really a direct personal attack, but some of these indirect, where they're kind of calling names or making people bad or wrong because they have an idea. It's like you can disagree with it, but it doesn't make the other person bad or wrong for having it.
Right. Which is the idea of keeping something objective instead of subjective.
Yeah. So, and holding space for vigorous debate. Again, if you got the smartest people in the room, they're not going to all agree. They shouldn't. And, you know, you to take advantage of the fact that you have different perspectives and different levels of experience and different backgrounds.
Got it. So it sounds like in order to bring that sense of alignment when it's missing, for one, you got to have a goal that you're all moving towards. Two, there's a plan that needs to be in place. And then three, open communication that is going to allow for maybe clarifying where there may be confusion and really get everyone's perspective as to what could work. Not to say you're going to take everything from it, but at least that there's an open space for communication.
Yeah. And at a deeper level, you have to build trust. Like I sometimes do a trust exercise with clients called the lifeline exercise, which people can just Google it. And it's like you take your life from zero to where you are, and you take school and work, and kind of, you know, take the points where you were completely fulfilled or unfulfilled, and then take your personal life and kind of plot on it where you were fulfilled and unfulfilled, and then go around the room and every person shares their personal lifeline, like the highs and the lows. And it's amazing. You know, I have my former coach, Kevin Lawrence, has worked with people who've been working together for 20 years. They do this exercise once and they learn stuff about the other person that they had no idea about, especially some of those early childhood experiences or very, you know, seminal events that happen to them. And you come out of that and it just, because and people share only to the point that they trust the other people. Like it's a vulnerability exercise.
Now, why would vulnerability and trust be of a pivotal thing when it comes to a business and alignment?
Again, because we can only advance at the speed of trust. If I don't trust you, then I'm not going to actually open up about what I really see the business problems to be. I would say half of my work as a facilitator is to get the biggest problem facing the company on the table. And sometimes a year or 2 years goes by where no one is willing to name it. And I'm not in the business, so I can't see it. But until someone is like willing to risk like putting it down on the table, and sometimes it's like interpersonal conflicts, like that's the biggest challenge. But my experiences in business, you can move forward from almost any bad news, but you can actually go out of business because everyone ignored it. So
that's good. Just bring it to the forefront. Don't let it fester. Some of the stuff that I've seen be the most destructive to relationships, whether professional or personal, is exactly that. People, they don't communicate what's in their space, and then they let it go and grow and fester. And then at one point, one person will blow up, and it could have just easily been resolved by a simple communication years in the past.
Yeah, totally. And it's another, and even in personal relationships, it often boils down to trust. Like, do I trust you with my most vulnerable, like, you know, like I'm going to share with you what's really not working in the relationship, but I have to trust you to hold space for that and not try and make me bad or wrong for having these feelings. And depending on where each individual is in their personal growth journey and their ability to hold space for each other, that, you know, my wife and I next month will celebrate 42 years of marriage.
Oh,
And,
congratulations.
in the first 30 years, like, we soldiered on, and I think we did a pretty good job and raised 3 kids, but we've done more relationship counseling work and more work on our relationship in the last dozen years than in the previous 30 combined. Part of that is my admitting I was an alcoholic and going in recovery, and then that process triggered some things for my wife.
Thank you for sharing that with us, David, because again, this is where I've seen too many times where the facade of things being perfect takes away from the possibility of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that things are good when in all reality they're not takes away from any space for a possibility to emerge, which is ultimately we all want to experience life from a place of fulfillment and joy. We want to be connected with the other person. We don't want to have space between us. We don't want to create a sense of conflict. But sometimes the very same thing that we're trying to prevent is the same thing that we are bringing about. Thank you for sharing that, because for anybody listening right now, if there is something that you may be right now seeing, maybe you know that it's something that doesn't work in your relationship, in your business, the best thing you can do is to start to bring it to the forefront.
And some things. So, like, if we can talk about my alcoholism for a bit. So,
Sure.
one of the ways I coped with business stress was drinking. I mean, it's how I coped with having, feelings I didn't want. I was a daily drinker for over 20 years. Um, but I also was in denial for decades. Like, I this amazing. So I talked earlier about going to this event where I learned about this framework, this Skyburn Harnish, and in the back of the room were 2 coaches, and I went and talked to both of them. And one of them, Kevin Lawrence, he made me more uncomfortable than I'd been in years. In fact, I had tears in the corner of my eyes, and it made me realize how unfulfilled I was in my career at that time. And I ended up hiring Kevin, and I worked with Kevin for a total of 9 years. But after 18 months, we had like kind of cleared all the clutter off the table. And the elephant in the room was my drinking. And so on January 26, 2009, 10:30 at night, I drank my last beer. And my agreement with Kevin was like the night before a coaching session, I would send like a summary of what my wins from the previous couple of weeks, and then what the topic was that I wanted to dig into. And so I sent off that email saying, tomorrow we're going to talk about my drinking problem. And I believe the universe put Kevin in my path so I could get sober. But until I sent that email to Kevin, and then the next day when I opened up to him, that was the first time I really was out of denial. And if we go back to trust, it took 18 months of my working with Kevin to build a trust. Like, I knew when I sent that email that I was done, because I knew Kevin would never let me off the hook. Like, because I knew how much he cared for me. And we had built that two-way trust relationship. And I trusted him enough that he would figure out the right thing for me to do. And he coached me to go to 12-step recovery. I agreed. That was a Tuesday. And I agreed to go to a meeting by that Friday. And being the overachiever that I am, that afternoon I went online and I was going to an event downtown, a technology networking and presentation event. It was finished, around 8. And I looked, and lo and behold, like on the drive home, a quarter of a block off the road I was going to drive down, there was a meeting at 8:30.
Wow.
And so Tuesday, January 27th, 2009, I went to this meeting, and kind of sat on the edge of my seat, ready to bolt, as most people do when they go to their first meeting. Not even 24 hours sober, because it's only 8:30 and I had my last drink 10:30 the night before. But about 2/3 of the way through the meeting, the chairperson asked, "Is there anyone new who'd like to stand and introduce themselves?" And thankfully, the chairperson that day just really was patient and just created space. Seemed like it was 2 minutes. It was probably 20 seconds, but I sat on my hands, and then I stood up and said, "I'm David, and I'm an alcoholic." And that was the first admittance of something that had been true for me for a very long time. And now I accept it's just a part of me. Like, I have an alcoholic part of me. That's just who I am. And And, I've subsequently done a lot of work in 12-step work in, my principal program. I'm just celebrated 5 years in adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And they have 3 different workbooks, and I've done all of those. I will say, for those of you that considering or in 12-step programs, for me personally, I've only succeeded in doing that work by doing it with small groups that meet like weekly and hold each other accountable. Like, I've never succeeded in just doing it with a sponsor or just doing it on my own. I need the group framework. So if you're struggling and you've never done it, I encourage you to find, and you can always start your own little working step group. And you only need 4 or 5 people to get going. I recommend 4 or 5 because probably only 3 of you will finish. Like,
keeping it intimate.
It's pretty common that 1 or 2 drop out for various reasons. And that has contributed, in addition to therapy work and counseling, relationship counseling work, those, I've been working on it for 15 years. In fact, that meeting I went to on Tuesday, January 27th, 2009, I made what's called a home group, which means it's the group I commit to going to every week. And if I'm in town, I'm always there, and it's the one I'm of service to. And tonight I'm taking my 15-year cake at my home group.
Wow. Oh man, this is it tonight. Wow.
Tonight.
What a serendipitous moment this is. I'm so glad to be here with you, man, and acknowledge you.
Thank you.
Because again, you sharing this so openly goes to show the work you've done. And as you shared before, again, for me, alcoholism is very close to my family. My dad's side, a lot of them dealt with it. I saw literally all of them at one point in time deal with it. My father, for a long time, he was able to operate perfectly, but every single day he had to drink. Same thing with my grandma. So it's very close to me. And as you're sharing that, it's just a part of you. I don't get a sense at all of any sort of make wrong. There's full grace to the experience. And that stood out to me because I remember when my father first started to get present to what he was going through, there was shame to it. There was a sense of guilt to it. So how were you? And this is for I'm thinking for somebody out there that may be in this space where maybe they're seeing oh, I am drinking multiple times a week. And maybe it's something for me to look at. But, that guilt and that shame start to creep in. How were you able to, number one, admit where you were at, and 2, not have guilt or shame towards the experience?
Okay, so let me try and throw 2 or 3 things out around that. Okay. So first of all, I just want to articulate, like your father, and like many, probably the majority of alcoholics, super high performing. In fact, it's part of how I powered up to get a lot done, was to use alcohol, because I'd override feelings of tiredness and, and just so it was my coping mechanism. Right. Part of my mission in life is to try and reduce the stigma of alcoholism. And I agree, there's a lot of stigma. It comes from Hollywood. It comes from societies, Western societies' impression of it. It's this belief that alcoholism is a moral disease. If you just pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, you wouldn't have this problem. And it's completely false. Alcoholism and addiction is a mental health disease. Right? It's actually in the practitioner's Bible in the US and in Canada. There's alcohol use disorder, there's substance use disorder. And so I can't do anything about the other people who are going to judge you, but I can say that you don't need to judge yourself. It's not something to be ashamed of. You're dealing with the most powerful drug on the planet, alcohol, which is the most socially acceptable. Like today, if some scientist invented alcohol and went to the FDA and went to get approval for it, it never would be approved.
Nuts. Yeah.
Right? So like, it literally is the most powerful drug in the planet. We don't treat it that way. We don't talk about it that way. But I mean, the scientists, the people who know about this, that's what they say. So, as much as you can, know it's a mental health disease, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of to having mental health disease. And I've had to become much better at that. And I have become much more compassionate with those that have other forms of mental health disease. Like, through my journey, it's like, who am I to judge? And to some extent, I didn't even know I had those judgments. And to some extent I did. but I'm much more able to have compassion. And I guess there's two other messages I really want to communicate to anyone who's listening who feels like they're struggling with alcohol or alcoholism or alcohol or drugs. Is there is hope. Like if a hopeless alcoholic like me can get sober, I'm telling you, you can too. But the other thing I know is this is a disease of the mind. And so the mind that got us addicted or alcoholic is not the mind that can get us clean and sober. So you can't do it alone. It's just, I don't think it's possible to do it alone. And there's lots of help. You don't, it doesn't have to be 12-step. That's what's worked super well for me. And I have a lot of experience, strength, and hope out of 12-step recovery that I'm always happy to share. But there are lots of other, there are other ways and other methods. But again, it's don't do it alone. Like you need to find people who can help you, whether they're professional, whether it's, the beauty of 12-step recovery is it doesn't cost you anything. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days and see what you think. Right? Like we'll gladly refund you your misery if you want to go out and check it out and see if it's still good out there. Seriously, like
yeah,
people do. I've never had anyone go out and come back and who really was an alcoholic said it got better.
Yeah, man, it's so important to remember that we as humans, we're supposed to be tribal by nature. Like that is part of who we are. The moment we get separated from a community, we start to feel like we're alone. And that's when we start to turn to maybe things that are numbing, not supportive. And also in entrepreneurs, how many times as an entrepreneur, I know that it's challenging. There's days where I'm by myself for hours on end, weeks, sometimes I'm hours on end. And I'm somebody that I get recharged when I'm with people. So if I don't take that intentional time outside of business to go and meet with somebody, grab some coffee, maybe go dancing somewhere, hang out with friends, have a barbecue, whatever it may be, if I don't do that, my mental health starts to take a decline.
And I'd like to address that a little bit with a framework or a way of thinking about things that comes from this coach that I worked with, Kevin Lawrence. So he has a book, Your Oxygen Mask First, which I highly recommend. And he has a master planning template for your business and you and your life. But the main thing that Kevin does that I also coach a lot with my clients is to think about yourself in 3 areas, which is one is like your career, your business, you get older, your investments, your finances. So that's like one category. Then there's your life and your relationships. And a lot of entrepreneurs are, very passionate family people, and they're very active with their kids and their family. But what happens is there's this piece in between that we as entrepreneurs and a lot of high performing people really squeeze out in the middle, and that's yourself, myself. And so when coming up with a plan for the year, it's like, what are those resiliency things like that you just talked about? Like you have pretty good self-awareness of those things that renew you. My challenge to you would be, are you putting enough of those in your life consciously? So I talk about like strategic planning for business, but I think you need a plan more for you, which is, so what do you want to achieve in your business? Fine. Like you've got some goals, and maybe you do some of the stuff I'm suggesting where you look at the bigger picture and 3 years out and work backwards. And, what are the things you're going to do in your life, to, like, my kids are older. I have to be more proactive about planning time to be with them. Otherwise it never happens. Right. So, are we going to try and travel together? Or is there anything particular that we want to do? And then there's things like with Carolee and what's my plan with Carolee, and so that kind of life piece. But then the resiliency piece. So for me, it's like making sure I go to meetings, like I'm putting my sobriety first. Like getting sober is the single biggest achievement of my life. And what I need to remember every single morning is I have to achieve it again. Like I don't get to rest on yesterday's work in this area. And I need, the hardest thing with entrepreneurs is making the number one thing the number one thing. Now, at least for me, I do not have this problem, because every day the number one thing has to be my sobriety. But I'm like a really passionate sailor. So, I haven't gone out. I did I spent time in Mexico in Puerto Vallarta, which is lovely. I love the heat, no gray and rain, because I live in Vancouver, which we get a lot of that in the winter. But I haven't been out on the boat since November. So on Friday, I'm going to go out for a couple of weeks. And my wife's going to join for some of that time. And some of the time is just going to be by myself. And I like solo sail my sailboat a lot. And it is one of the most renewing places. I believe in a power that's greater than me. And one of the reasons I love sailing so much is that in a sailboat, you have very little control over anything. Because what the weather is, what the swell is, what the waves are, what the tide and current is, you have no control over that. Yeah, I mean, you can choose when you want to leave. You can use tools to help you predict what those are going to be. But once you're out in it, you just got to cope with what you got. and it hammers home to me that I am powerless over most things in my life, right? And that there are forces at work that are just so much bigger than me. And I control kind of 1% of my little universe. I control how I get to respond to events that happen rather than react. And I get to choose what the next right step is. That's about it. Right? And I got to let go of pretty much all the rest. And for a control freak like me, this is being a big uphill battle. But as you mentioned earlier, it's a never ending part of my personal growth. Right?
Yeah.
Because inevitably I snatch back the reins and try and be in control, especially of things that I don't have any control over.
It's typically when we try to have the most control when we have no control.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So this kind of, I really encourage entrepreneurs to think about, some people, it's like buying a new motorbike and going on a 2,000-mile road trip, or is it jumping out of airplanes, or is it going for a road trip with some of your guy friends or female friends if you're a female entrepreneur, female listener? What is it that really renews your mental health, really builds your resiliency? Because we get so busy and we're passionate people. I'm a super passionate guy. So you get passionate in your business and passionate in your life, and it consumes a lot. And then what are you doing to refill the passion gas tank in you? Right? So that, because if you just keep depleting it, eventually you'll just crash and burn, which usually shows up as you get sick, you get injured, the universe takes you out without your permission. I find it's much better to be proactive and be doing things to sustain you and renew you, and sometimes it takes work to you got to run experiments and try things and say, oh well, I tried that, and I tried this networking group and going on this activity, and it was fun, but I don't really want to do it again. That's okay. Right? It's part of that playfulness. It's back to being a kid and trying things and just listening to yourself and figuring out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. Which is, at the core of entrepreneurship is a trial and error, test, rerun.
As my coaches keep coaching me, everything is an experiment. Everything is an experiment. Because what happens again, it's a control issue. If I do this, I will get $1 million more revenue. So you go do this and you don't get $1 million new revenue. And so you're a failure. I don't think that's the right perspective. It's okay, you have a plan, you're going to do these things, and you hope the outcome is going to be $1 million. So you go do these things. You don't get the $1 million you were hoping for. Well, what did you learn? It was an experiment. You tried some stuff. It didn't do what you thought it would do. Okay, so how do you adjust the experiment? The part where, which Einstein said is craziness, is when you just keep doing those things and they don't produce the results. And so you do more of them.
Expecting something new to come out.
Expect something different, right? But when you come in this more experimental, we're going to try it, we're going to see what happens, and then we're going to take the results and use it and course adjust and come up with different things to try. Then now, that's what I preach. Practicing it is still hard. It's very hard to not have expectations of things that are going to happen. Even though you don't have control of what's going to, the universe knows with mathematical precision what the outcome is going to be. And as my coaches coach me, David, you don't need to know the math. And as a computer scientist, math geek, this is really pissing me off. What do you mean I can't know the math?
What a challenge it's got to be. But at the end of the day, here you are.
There I am. And the universe ain't telling me the math.
And my perspective with entrepreneurship is it's the biggest access for a spiritual evolution, because it requires us to let go. It requires us to have full trust. It requires us to keep going. There's a sense of commitment, resilience to what you said earlier. And
it's almost always a stretch.
It's almost always a stretch. Correct. Oh yeah. It's not easy.
Right.
It's kind of requires some new steps in the unknown, trying new things out, being willing to fail. I mean, that in itself, I think that is a spiritual practice for people to really get over, because they want to look perfect. They want to get the right answer. It's like, no.
And it's intrinsically risky. Like whether it's your own capital, other people's capital, like whatever, like it comes, that's why a lot of people stay in jobs, because they perceive it as lower risk. I'm not certain in the 21st century that certainly isn't as true as it was in the 20th century. But yeah, I mean, starting your own business is at a different level, right? It's just at a completely different level of risk and hopefully reward. Right? Like
I mean, that's why we're here, to be able to bring something of value that can be a support to society, and then also to ourselves and our families.
And hopefully to ourselves. And a certain amount of my coaching, like fiscal literacy in general, I think is low, and among entrepreneurs, it generally is low. So, they're like, okay, I'm going to make $1 million more next year. Great. So how much of that's going into your pocket? They often can't tell me.
No. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, revenue is vanity. Like profits, where it's at.
Correct. Like,
I'd much rather see you just do way less revenue, but put an extra $250,000 in your pocket.
For sure.
Right.
For sure. Vanity, like you said, that's a great word when it comes to status. I want to look a certain way, but what is it really creating for me and my future, my legacy that I'm leaving behind?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So David, if you were to speak to the entrepreneur that's out there right now, that's struggling they're going through a valley, they don't know what to do, they love what they do, they have a vision for their business, they want to continue going. What are things that you would give them, some insights or tools, or maybe questions, or not sure, some practical steps to support them in staying the track, keeping moving forward?
Well, if I can self-promote a little bit here, I mean,
Sure.
I wrote a book, Wind in Your Sails, Vital Strategies That Accelerate Your Entrepreneurial Growth. And because I'm a sailor, it's a business book. It's just that every chapter starts with a sailing analogy, because I'm a sailor. But, I wrote Wind in Your Sails so that an entrepreneur, especially if you get the paperback edition, which I know is out of fashion, but, the idea is like you're stuck, you grab my book, you look in the index around the problem that you're having, and you go read like the 3 to maybe 7 pages around that idea. And you'll have at least 1 or 2 ideas for what to do next or try. And, I interviewed over 45 sales and marketing leaders and entrepreneurs for the book. And I feature 10 case studies. Like over a third of the book is other entrepreneurs' experience. So it's not just like my experience. So there's a wide variety of perspectives and experience in the book.
Yeah.
And, we shared our joint wisdom to try and we fell in a lot of potholes, and we're wearing a lot of scar tissue, and you're welcome to fall in your own potholes and scar tissue, but maybe you don't want to do it quite as often as we did.
Sure.
So your choice.
I mean, if we can learn from other people's mistakes, why are we going to go through them ourselves?
And
that's wisdom.
Yeah. And, I think a coach like me can be of big help. And if you can't afford or don't want to work with a coach, entrepreneur peer groups, hang out with other entrepreneurs, because they're probably struggling with some of the same stuff you are. And again, talking about it together, you're going to come up with more ideas. Or find a business mentor. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who've been very successful who give back their time by being a mentor. I find the biggest difference, I've been a mentor and I've been an angel investor and a board of director. The biggest difference I see of that and being a professional coach is when you pay someone, you pay more
Pay
attention.
attention. Yeah.
You pay closer attention, and you're more likely to listen to what they're saying and try some of the things they suggest. Whereas a mentor might tell you the same things, but it's like back, it's my business, it's my way or the highway. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that attitude is got your business. Like it's what is needed to start a business and get going, but it's not what works to sustain a business.
Sure. Well, I think it's such a big space to be in, David, and what you're doing, helping entrepreneurs building their business. As a coach myself, working with other businesses, I know that the work that you do is not easy. It is very rewarding,
It
and
is.
to see a client go from zero to from $10,000 a month to $100,000 a month is extremely rewarding. To see the other person, the impact that it's making in their life, and I imagine that you have clients who you're helping make some big impact. If somebody's interested in purchasing, thank you for doing that work, by the way. If
You're
somebody
welcome.
is interested in purchasing the book, working with you, what is the best way for people to contact?
My website, coachdjgreer.com. It's Coach D as in David, J as in James, Greer.com. Or if you Google Coach David Greer, there's a good chance I'll be in the top 5 there. And on the top of my website is my phone number and my email address. And the other thing is, I offer to any entrepreneur, I'm very happy to do a 1-hour coaching call with you on something that you're stuck on, and no charge, no obligation. We'll just talk through the issue, and my commitment is after an hour with me, you'll have 3 ideas to accelerate in the next 90 days. So that offer is always there. Just contact me, send me an email, use the contact form on my website. And the website also has a page on my book, and you can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available in Kindle, Nook, Audible, and print.
Amazing. Well, David, thank you for taking the time. For everybody listening, thank you for being here. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.